Okay, folks, we might get started. If you could all please stand. The acknowledgement of country and local government prayer and service acknowledgement. We acknowledge the traditional custodians of our beautiful lands and surrounding waters, the Ramangiri and the Ngarrindjeri people. As a community, we recognise and we respect their cultural connection with the Please be seated. And we can begin. Welcome everyone. We have apologies from Councillor Henderson and Councillor Littley, who may be late, who'll be trying to get here if he can. What's that noise? It's the vacuum cleaner. Oh, okay. Welcome to people in the gallery and also to those people who are listening from home via our live streaming. We have two items on the agenda tonight. The first item of business is the Valuer General's Revaluation Initiative. And the first recommendation is that Council receive and note the Valuer General's Revaluation Initiative report. Would someone like to move that way? Councillor Kemp, and seconded by Councillor Schofield. Would you like to speak to that, Councillor Kemp? Councillor Schofield? No. Does anybody want to speak to receiving and noting the report? All those in favour of receiving it? That's carried unanimously, thank you. The second recommendation is that Council write to the Valuer General requesting community consultation and information sessions be provided to the rural community as a matter of urgency, and that copies of this letter be sent to relevant parties, including the Local Government Association, South Australia Regional Organisation of Councils, Primary Producers SA, the Member for Finnis, and other regional councils included in Cycle 2 of the initiative. Do I have someone to move that way? Councillor Schofield? And seconded by Councillor Robertson. Do you want to speak to that, Councillor Schofield? Councillor Robertson?
Yes, thank you, Mayor. I notice that this has been significantly changed from the motion that I put forward before, but the intent of it, I think, is good. This is an issue that was raised up at the Agribusiness Working Group, that the primary producer members of that group were briefed by our finance manager. Made an excellent job of highlighting the issue that the Valuer General had this revaluation initiative, and but also highlighting the issues of how straitjacketed the process was. That it was the Valuer General going ahead with this initiative project without appearing to have any regard for the long and short-term problems being experienced in the rural sector. Particularly in the shorter term issues, the ones that you're all aware of, fire and drought, but also in the longer term environment in which farming is taking place in Australia in relation to cost pressures and which include issues of rating, but also because the traditional methods of rating properties may be changing in the future in relation to the way in which the land is managed and the extent to which it's being managed by and owned by the private owners themselves, and the extent to which government takes ownership. Just to give you a small example, farmers build dams on their land in response to government policy to drought-proof their farms. These days, if you've built a large enough dam, you can have the state coming along and taking away part of the water without any consultation and emptying part or all of the dam, irrespective of the impact that has on water for livestock for the remainder of the year. So land ownership and its value is under pressure from a lot of different areas. But the council staff attended a meeting on the Valuer General last October, I believe, and which was anticipated to be a session where the council staff would be able to ask questions, get information, and be involved. They went to the meeting to be told basically, this is the plan that we have, and now you can go away and do it, or we're going to come and do it, and this is what it's at. And so the members of the working group were shocked to know that it was basically not only the council staff who knew basically very little about this revaluation initiative of rural land values, but of course that they'd heard nothing about the process in the news media. So they asked that myself as the elected member not as the elected member, but as an elected member on that committee, I was able to put a motion without notice that was on the Thursday, motion without notice to the council on the Monday morning, the Tuesday morning, to be able to try and gather support for processes that the revaluation that's going on is now well underway from the Valuer General's Department, but some of the implementation aspects of that of the revaluation.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. If you don't mind winding up, your time's up.
Yeah, so I'm almost there. That to bring this to the notice of other councils, to the primary producers, and but also to protest to the government that the community consultation process involved in this was not at all what was promised at the last election, and so to raise the issue up, awareness.
Thank you, Councillor Robertson. Does anybody else want to speak on this motion? Councillor Glasbrook.
I'll just ask a question first, if I could, please. So last year, for example, the residential values were adjusted to the best of my knowledge, and rates were increased. Is this a similar process that the Valuer General is just reviewing rural properties and just part of, or are they doing something specifically to increase the rates, or?
No, my understanding is that these are much more comprehensive reviews. In particular, there have been particular areas and categories have been targeted. So last year, what we will receive, as we did do every year, the Valuer General looks at all valuations and adjusts them according to, improvements or other changes within our area. That's a regular thing that occurs. This is a comprehensive review of particular categories, and as is in primary production at the moment. But in other areas, my understanding is metropolitan areas have been reviewed. In other council areas, quite comprehensive review, which is different to what they normally do.
I think Councillor Hales had his hand up first. Are you happy for Charles? He said for you to go first.
No. gets to hear what I get to say. He might disagree with me. It's disappointing that Councillor Robertson didn't put this motion up tonight so he could speak twice, because he's certainly the man who's covered this exceedingly well. And I thought he'd done an excellent job and ready with the motion on without notice for the last council meeting, where we would have been a week ahead of ourselves rather than a week behind. I think it was all clear in the councillors. Nobody objected to the fact that it was difficult or complex or too hard to understand. And, you know, we would have also probably picked up a few extra people on the live stream, because this is something that I think we're saying is the primary producers are pretty well unaware of. I don't care too much for people living in rural living areas or rural living zones, because they're not exactly producing anything much, maybe running some horses and 1 or 2 sheep. But this is something that, that really is going to impact a lot of people who are trying to feed us all, trying to feed themselves at times too, and just stay ahead of the bank. So I do hope that the government are taking this into consideration. Surely they are. The Liberal Party, after all, the Blue Boys, should be looking at the rural zone. And if not, well, bad luck to them, because I'll get a kickback on this one, I think, from the public. I'll certainly be voting for this motion.
Thank you, Mayor Jenkins. If I may start with a couple of questions first. So stage 1 was undertaken last year by the Valuer General's office. What was the impact on City of Victor Harbor from stage 1?
There was no impact. We weren't involved in stage 1. So there were some trial councils that were involved in that exercise. And the presentation we had was that there were some values that went up and some values went down. So those values that were significantly impacted, they had direct correspondence from the Valuer General with those property owners, but it was a variety of ups and downs.
My follow-on from that would be, what type of impacts are we expecting from this stage 2 review? I guess the results of stage 1 were ups and downs. Could be similar, could be different. Is there any guess at?
No, there isn't. All we know is obviously the Valuer General is taking a much more comprehensive approach. So they are using quite a bit of different technology in regards to the viewing and assessments of properties. It's not just a matter of doing a bit of a drive-by. They are taking quite a bit of different photographs of property and viewings of property and comparisons of properties. So it's their assessment. I'm not really sure about the detail.
Does anybody else? Oh, so you want to speak?
If
Okay,
I may,
sorry, yep.
Mayor Jenkins. Yeah, I totally agree with what Councillor Robertson has said in terms of this is not at all what our current state government promised at the last election. There seems to be very much a disconnect with their ideology in terms of they want to introduce rate capping, but they've also done wholesale revaluations across the state that have increased rates for more often than not have increased rates. So it's interesting that they're increasing the tax revenue but blaming someone else for it. Unheard of by the state government, of course. So yeah, I think I fully support Councillor Robertson's motion here in regards to doing what we can, but I think once again we'll be left frustrated and playing the role of the receiver when it comes to the valuations.
Councillor Hales, does anybody else want to speak to the motion? Councillor Schofield, do you want to have your right of reply?
Thank you. Look, I agree wholeheartedly with both elected members. What is happening in the rural sector is there are more policies being made. It's harder to farm, and in particular in the water allocation, huge costs have been imposed on the farmers with the reduction of use of that natural water. So no, I think this is something that we should be supporting and hope that there will be some small outcome for our rural communities.
Thank you, Councillor Schofield. I'll put that motion to the floor then. All those in favour? Against? That's carried unanimously. Thank you. We now move to item 5, which is a confidential item. The first recommendation is that pursuant to section 92 of the Local Government Act 1999, the public be excluded from the meeting, with the exception of the Chief Executive Officer, Victoria McCurdy, Group Manager Governance and Finance, Kelly Knight-Stacey, Director Corporate and Customer Service, Karen Roczynski, Acting Director Community and Development, Mark Prisabilla, Director Environment and Infrastructure, Glenn Sanford, and Executive Assistant, Karina Overall. Karina's actually not here. Graham Pathouse is here. So we don't need the Executive Assistant, Karina Overall, but we do need Graham Pathouse. To enable the Council to consider information in relation to the agenda item Victor Horse Tram Granite Island Track Replacement Tender. The Council is satisfied that, pursuant to section 93K of the Act, the information to be received, discussed and considered in relation to the agenda item is a matter related to tenders for the provision of goods and services, and the public release of the information during the negotiation of any contract may jeopardise Council's ability to best secure the best value for money. In addition, the disclosure of this information would, on balance, be contrary to the public interest. The public interest in the public access to the meeting has been balanced against the public interest in the continued non-disclosure of the information. The benefit to the public at large resulting from withholding the information outweighs the benefit of disclosure of the information. The Council is satisfied that these principles that the meeting be conducted in a place open to the public has been outweighed in these circumstances because the information could jeopardise the commercial position of third parties. Do I have someone to move that way? Councillor Schofield, thank you. And the seconder for that, Councillor Kemp. Do either of you want to speak to that? Does anybody want to speak to that? All those in favour? Those against? That's carried. Thank you.